The world is watching a tragedy unfold in real time, and yet the silence from the traditional news outlets is deafening. We have to ask ourselves why nobody is reporting that Mexico, Brazil, and Canada are making humanitarian food drops and sending massive aid shipments to Cuba to bypass the current blockade. This is not some minor event or a small footnote in history. We are talking about sovereign nations taking a stand against a policy that is currently strangling the life out of an entire population. The reality on the ground in Cuba is beyond dire. The island is facing an energy collapse and a fuel shortage so severe that people are living without electricity for 20 hours a day. Hospitals are struggling to keep the lights on, and schools have been forced to close because there is simply no way to keep them running. This is a human rights issue that transcends any political boundary or party affiliation. When we see countries like Mexico and Canada stepping up to send ships loaded with thousands of tons of beans, powdered milk, and medical supplies, we should be asking why this isn't the lead story on every major network. Mexico has already dispatched naval vessels like the Papalopan and the Huasteco carrying over 2,000 tons of aid to alleviate the suffering caused by the recent oil embargo. Canada has pledged millions of dollars in food aid specifically to bypass the government and reach the people who are starving. These are facts that are being buried while the media focuses on distractions. The current situation was triggered by a massive shift in regional power and the tightening of an energy blockade that has essentially cut off the lifeline of the island. Cuba only produces about 40% of the fuel it needs to survive, making it incredibly vulnerable to these kinds of external pressures. By cutting off oil shipments from traditional suppliers, the current administration in the United States is intentionally creating a humanitarian crisis to force a political outcome. This is collective punishment of a civilian population, and it is a violation of international law. United Nations experts have already come out and condemned these actions as an extreme form of unilateral economic coercion. They have stated clearly that this blockade is a threat to a democratic and equitable international order, but you won't hear that on the nightly news. Instead, we see a complete lack of accountability and a refusal to acknowledge that our neighbors to the north and south are actively working to prevent a total humanitarian collapse. It is a bold and fearless act for these nations to stand up and say that they will not let people starve for the sake of a political game. We need to start demanding better from our information sources. We need to stop letting these stories be pushed to the shadows. If Mexico and Canada can find the courage to send aid in the face of threats and tariffs, then we should at least have the courage to talk about it. This isn't about being on one side or the other. It is about recognizing the basic humanity of the people living just a few miles off our coast. They are facing a crisis that affects their water systems, their food production, and their very survival. The lack of fuel means crops are rotting in the fields because there is no way to harvest or transport them. This is a man-made disaster, and the silence of the media makes them complicit in the suffering. We have to be the ones to share the truth and shine a light on what is actually happening. Every day that we remain silent is another day that millions of people suffer in the dark. It is time to speak up and recognize that the world is moving forward with or without the consent of those who seek to isolate and destroy. The humanitarian drops and shipments are a signal that the international community is tired of seeing civilians used as pawns. We must keep pushing for the truth and demanding that these facts be recognized. The deafening silence and the cost of cruelty in Cuba, the current state of our world, is a reflection of the priorities of those in power. And right now, those priorities are a direct threat to human life. It is absolutely heartbreaking to witness the United States standing by while knowing full well that Cubans are starving, and yet doing nothing to alleviate that suffering. Instead of leading with compassion or humanitarian concern, we see a leadership that is more interested in flexing its power and boasting about how it can manipulate resources and rob civilians of their basic dignity. It is impossible to ignore the reality that while an entire island of people faces a total collapse of their power grid and a desperate shortage of food and medicine, the focus of the current administration remains fixed on personal gain and the escalation of conflict in places like Iran. There is a blatant disregard for life that should shake every person to their core. We are watching a leader who seems more concerned with hiding from his own files and protecting his own image than with the literal survival of our neighbors just 90 miles off our coast. The most disturbing part of this entire situation is the way so many people have been blinded into thinking that this man is some kind of savior or a godlike figure who deserves our absolute respect and devotion. Let it be clear that no one is going to kiss the feet of a man who commits evil acts and shows such a chilling indifference to the plight of the vulnerable. You can love him all you want, and you can go right ahead and serve him if that is your choice, but let us stop pretending that his actions align with any kind of moral or spiritual truth. We know the difference between the work of a healer and the work of a destroyer. We know who Jesus is, and we know that the path of greed, the path of war, and the path of allowing innocent children to go hungry is not the work of Jesus. It is a manipulation of faith and a betrayal of everything it means to be a decent human being. While Mexico, Brazil, and Canada are actively trying to bypass the blockade to deliver life-saving supplies, the United States continues to enforce a policy of strangulation that serves no purpose other than to inflict pain for political leverage. This isn't about policy or borders anymore. It is about the fundamental right to exist. When a government chooses to use starvation as a tool, it has lost its moral authority. We cannot remain silent while people are being used as pawns in a game of global dominance. The reality is that the media is not reporting on these humanitarian drops because it would expose the cruelty of the current stance. It would show that, while we claim to be a beacon of light, we are actually the ones holding the door shut on people who are begging for help. The bold and fearless truth is that we are witnessing a humanitarian crime, and the people cheering it on are complicit in that cruelty. We have to speak up against the idea that any leader is above the law or above the basic requirements of humanity. We have to demand that our resources be used to save lives instead of being funneled into more war and more corruption. If you want to follow a man who puts himself above the needs of the starving, then that is on your conscience, but do not expect the rest of us to join in that worship. We see exactly what is happening, and we will not be quiet about it. The world is watching, and history will not be kind to those who chose power over people. Please feel free to follow, subscribe, comment, like, and share. This helps you to stay connected to me, and it helps me to remain here creating more content for you. Thank you, love. Always, Maria DC Santiago.